Welcome to Unlapped. Laurence Edmondson here alongside Nate Saunders to talk to you about everything that happened in Zandvoort, but also some breaking news that has just dropped in our email inboxes as we were about to start this podcast. And that is that Logan Sargeant is out at Williams, the only American driver in the grid, out, an Argentinian, Franco Colapinto, taking his place from the Italian Grand Prix, which is this weekend, onwards. It's a story that we thought was developing to some extent as we were leaving, well, basically as from the point that Sargeant crashed on Saturday in final practice at Zandvoort. But there were a number of names being thrown around at that time. We were hearing Liam Lawson as a potential driver. Of course, he was at AlphaTauri last year and also is the Red Bull reserve driver. Mick Schumacher was another one we heard about. But Franco Colapinto, who was the Williams reserve, he's part of their young driver program. He's been racing in F2 throughout this season. He's in. So, Nate, let's start here. What do we make of this change?
Yeah, pretty surprising. I mean, not the fact that Sargeant was out, but the fact that it's Colapinto whose name is going to be above that garage at Monza. But I think the more you digest it, the more it makes a lot of sense. So, we wrote the story, didn't we, on Sunday? We got, different bits of information about, to me, something that I think really escalated the fact that we knew Sargeant was going to be out, regardless of who replaced him, which was the fact that after qualifying, James Vowles kind of went very, very purposefully over to Red Bull. Spoke to Christian Horner about getting Liam Lawson. So that's where those rumors came from. Williams did look into that. I got mixed messages from Red Bull about their openness to doing that deal. Obviously, there's a lot of risks that come with that. If Lawson spins out a couple times, has a bad time with Williams, maybe it's hurt him in the long run in terms of giving him a Red Bull seat. But what it did confirm to us was that Vowles, I think that crash of Sargeant with that, just so many upgrades on the car. I mean, the first shot of that after he crashed was all of the mechanics who had just been working so hard to improve that team's fortunes. You knew that they were just fed up and they were done with it. And I spoke to people at the team who said similar. My first reaction to this was actually that what a great time we're kind of living through in F1 at the moment, because this is another team that has, not for Logan Sargeant, but I mean from the context of we've got another team that's giving a young driver who's part of their academy a legitimate chance in Formula One. We know that Mercedes is about to do that with Kimi Antonelli. We've seen Oliver Behrman with Ferrari progress through, and so long, it wasn't the case, was it? You'd get just random drivers coming in and out and stuff like that. So as much as this is bad news for Logan Sargeant, I don't think anything is surprising in that sense, because he's not taken that opportunity and delivered on it like he should have done. But I don't know much about Franco Colapinto. I've got to be honest. I've obviously seen his name on the timing screens when the Formula 2 races are on in the paddock. But yeah, just a really exciting opportunity for him. And it actually makes sense. People might say, well, he might just be as error prone as Sargeant. But I think if you're Williams right now, that the medium-term future of your team is that Carlos Sainz is coming in with Alex Albon. It's unlikely, if that goes right, you're going to need to think about a replacement driver for either of those two, other than something unforeseen happening, like one of them getting injured or something like that. So knowing what you've got with Colapinto makes a lot of sense here. Understanding, is this guy someone who we can throw in at the deep end if needs be? Sargeant clearly doesn't have a future with that team. We all know that now. So yeah, I think surprising, but you can see the more you pick away at it, the logic. What about you, mate? Are you surprised? Is this a sensible move? What's your kind of your first take?
Not so surprised in that we knew that Sargeant was under a lot of pressure. That's been the case throughout the season. There's been rumors throughout that he might not see the end of the year. It started off with people talking about Kimi Antonelli, who is also racing in F2. Actually, he's a position behind Colapinto in the standings. But of course, he's Mercedes' big hope going forward. And there was this logic, perhaps, that if Mercedes didn't want to put him in straight away to replace Lewis Hamilton next year, it now looks like that is exactly what they're going to do, and expecting an announcement fairly soon on that one. But if they didn't want to do that, then Williams would be an obvious place. But of course, things move very quickly. Carlos Sainz was available. And that's the strange thing about this situation, as you mentioned, that Colapinto is going to come in and race the rest of the season in Formula One, knowing that unless he does something truly remarkable and he gets snapped up for, the sole remaining seat at Sauber, then it's going to be a long wait probably until he gets another go. But if you're in that position, if you're a Formula 2 driver and you get the call to go into Formula 1, you would never ever turn it down. It's your opportunity to show what you can do. So I think from Colapinto's side, of course, it makes perfect sense. From the Williams side, I guess they're gonna know what they've got, and that they'll have some idea based on his work in simulators, and also he did the FP1 session at Silverstone, so they'll have a basic idea of how capable he is, how able he is to deal with the amount of information that comes flying at you when you're in a Formula One seat, even just in a practice session, and being able to digest that and turn it into potential performance on the car. So they must have been impressed along those lines. And in James Vowles' statement, he talks about how important it is to Williams that their academy program does actually push drivers towards race seats, and they get opportunities. So yeah, so some logic there. But I'm like you, I'm not hugely up to date with Colapinto's.
But you've got his stat sheet there, I think, don't you, from just before the show? So I mean, I think a lot of our listeners will probably be in a similar boat. I mean, what are kind of the highs and lows of this guy's career? Because this is one of the funny things, just for context, for people that might be like, these two journalists don't know what they're talking about with this young guy. So often these F2 races go on, and that is the moments when we have our heads down in our laptops, we're in the paddock, we're chasing stuff up. So you hear names and you hear of performances and stuff like that, but it's very difficult to actually sit down and assess F2 drivers unless you're reporting on it. So I'm kind of curious to know what the highs and lows have been recently for him.
Yeah, I mean, there was a bit of a buzz around him, I remember initially, but I think that, it was coming from the Argentinian crew. There's an ESPN Argentinian crew, and I remember
that was my first thought was those guys are going to have a great time this weekend.
To them at one stage, and and they were fairly optimistic, but I think carefully so. It wasn't clear, or hasn't been hugely clear from his junior career, that he's this standout, was always going to make it to F1 kind of driver, whereas someone like Antonelli, that's the feeling we've had as he's gone through Frecker and so on. So yeah, Frecker, which is basically Formula 4 in 2021, he finished sixth in that. In 2023, so last year, he was fourth in Formula 3. And then this year, he's been racing in Formula 2. High point has to be Imola sprint race victory, but he's also been on the podium in Spain and Austria during feature races, which of course is that bit more difficult. It's more like a real Grand Prix, and you don't get the advantage of reverse grids and so on. So I think it's been a very solid season so far in F2, but not the kind of one where he would be the standout driver to get that promotion. But that's why it's so important to be a part of one of these junior driver schemes when you're in Formula 2 and when you're at that stage, because it's surprising how many opportunities do come along. I mean, Oliver Behrman, who of course stood in for Carlos Sainz in Saudi Arabia when Sainz had his appendix removed. There was a lot of buzz around him, and he was a Ferrari young driver, but even this year he struggled in Formula 2. So having that link to an F1 team, and even if your results aren't stellar in Formula 2, so that they know how good you are, the talent that you have, the reserve that you have, your ability to, say, in a engineering meeting to contribute in a positive way, to push things forward, that kind of overall driver intelligence that doesn't always come across in all the randomness of a Formula 2 season. That can be the kind of thing that actually gets these drivers the nod. So it'll be interesting when we get to Monza. I'm on my way already. Nate, I think you're leaving tomorrow, to get a feeling from within Williams, and no doubt from James Vowles, about why this decision, was in the end absolutely the one they went to go for, because it does feel like it was a fairly quick turnaround from that accident in FP3 in Zandvoort, and the unfortunate timing of that. I mean, it's never great to completely smash up a Formula 1 car, obviously, but the unfortunate timing of that was that they had all these upgrades on the car, and to go and destroy all of that hard work that the team has pushed extra hard to make sure it's on the car immediately after the summer break. That kind of stuff really does, it doesn't go down well within a Formula 1 team, and as a general morale issue and also confidence in the driver issue, it does pop up. So I mean, we've seen rookies come in mid-season before, but Nate, I mean, how big a challenge is this? My mind immediately goes to Nick de Vries, who stood in for Alex Albon when he had his appendix moved at Monza, and I wonder whether Colapinto will be hoping for something similar this weekend.
Yeah, well, I think, to that point, I think Monza is almost the perfect place for him to jump in. I think it's a place where Williams should be quite competitive, just given their car. And that, I mean, that's a good thing. It was actually one of the things that De Vries's detractors actually used against him when he struggled early on with AlphaTauri. Was they said, well, he just drove a competitive Williams at Monza, and yeah, of course he looked great. So there can be bad points to that, but like you said, this is a very different situation. Colapinto is kind of going to the situation. It's very, very unlikely that Audi are going to turn around and be like, yeah, on the basis of 6 good races, we'll take this guy, because they want a slightly bigger name driver than somebody who's a rookie. So it's tough, and the biggest challenge is going to be the 2 after Monza. It's going to be Baku and Singapore. I mean, that is a huge, huge challenge for any driver to master. But to these young drivers' credits, I mean, I think the temperature has changed quite a lot, and I think we've seen it. It's been gradual, since. I mean, Max obviously came in, and Max just kind of shattered the perception, I think, of what really young drivers can do in Formula One, coming in at 17. But if you look at that rookie season in 2019, when we had Lando, we had George, we had Alex Albon, young guys came in, and they're still around on the grid today. And actually, if you look back through the history of recent Formula one of the few times a company didn't back one of its younger drivers now looks like one of the biggest mistakes any team has ever made, in the fact that Oscar Piastri is not driving for Alpine at the moment. He's racing with McLaren. He's a race winner, and he looks like he's going to be there for the long term. So I think that, yeah, there is a lot of pressure. I think that these teams are so confident in the way they prepare these youngsters. They're so confident in the data that they have, confident in the fact that the guys they on board do have the right stuff, to coin a phrase from one of my favorite films. So I think it's tricky, but if you're a guy like Colapinto, to this your whole life, and suddenly you've gone from, in the space of 72 hours, wondering, well, am I ever going to get that chance, to suddenly you've got 9 races, assuming nothing drastic happens down the line, or there's not a secondary plan in motion behind the scenes. So there is a lot of pressure there, but I actually think that the fact that competing for next year's seat, the fact that he's not been brought in with a, hey, if you get this right, you're in, if you don't, you're out, and you're on the sidelines. I think that will put him into quite a unique situation, because really everyone's going to compare him to what Sargeant did. So if he can just not make those mistakes, if he just keep it out of the wall, I think immediately that looks pretty impressive, because everyone will know, hey, this guy jumped in very late. He had, like you said, he had 1 free practice at Silverstone, so he'll have kind of credit in the bank. And if you look at the reputation that Liam Lawson has now, on the back of 3 races last year, where, let's face it, he was pretty solid in those races. He didn't do anything spectacular, but he didn't make any major mistakes when he was standing in for Daniel Ricciardo. And now everyone is pretty overwhelmingly of the opinion that he deserves to be on the 2025 grid in some capacity. Colapinto could do the same thing. So huge chance for him. And a great talking point for us to get into in Monza. And just a quick word on Sargeant. I do hope Sargeant ends up somewhere where he can kind of race, and kind of, one of the worst things Formula One can do to a driver is it can make you always kind of that Formula One back marker. People remember you as, Max Chilton, or, maybe Latifi, if we want to use a Williams example, someone who was kind of perennially at the back. But these guys aren't slouches. Some of them might come from money and stuff like that, but Sargeant had glimpses through his junior career of someone who, has some talent there. So I hope he finds somewhere good to go. Maybe an IndyCar or a WEC or something like that. But it'll be interesting to see where he goes, and to kind of follow his career from that point, and see if, he does make a success of himself somewhere else. Because I think sometimes some drivers, Formula One is just, the lights are a little bit too bright. It's maybe just not quite the right time in their career. There's a lot of different reasons why. But yeah, hopefully Sargeant kind of lands on his feet after this, because I don't know about you, lads, I think we're both the same. Every time I've spoken to Sargeant, lovely guy. Maybe too nice, maybe there needed to be a bit more of a of a fire and a bad streak to him. We've seen that, with younger drivers before. But yeah, I hope he ends up somewhere great. But yeah, a fantastic storyline, fascinating storyline for us to dig more into this week.
Yeah, one certainly we'll be getting into over the next few days when we get to Monza. Let's take a brief look back at Zandvoort. Of course, Lando Norris taking his 2nd victory, beating Max Verstappen by over 22 seconds. That was a big winning margin. I saw F1 post statement and a picture of Lando Norris's face on the podium, because it was that kind of victory. It was a statement victory. But what does it mean in the context of this season, do you reckon? I mean, it's tempting, isn't it, to look at that, and if you extrapolate it across the rest of the year, you're like, well, Norris can close this 70-point gap. But what's the reality here?
Well, yeah, it definitely was a statement win. And actually, they put out another one, I think yesterday, which had all the margins of victory at every race. And it even eclipsed any of the victories that Max had at the start of the year. And do you remember what we were saying about Max at the start of the season? No one's going to catch him. He's in a different planet. So it's huge. It's huge to see him do that. And the fact that he built that lead having been behind until lap 18 as well. So you can effectively say that was the gap that he pulled over Max in 18 laps fewer than the final race distance, which was what, 77 laps, I think it was. So yeah, really, really impressive. Yeah, it's really, really impressive, to have done that. And I think it did also sum up the fact that we saw quite a relaxed Lando, didn't we, all weekend? There was lots of talk about his starts and stuff like that. And I have to say, I thought it was very impressive the way he dealt with that. He obviously, the starts generally at McLaren are a bit of an issue at the moment. And he just waited. He knew the pace of the car that he had, and he got that win. And that narrative of Lando can't win or Lando can't start, that might stay there. But I wrote in a piece on Sunday night, if you can win by 22 seconds, who needs to be first into turn one anyway? You can wait for that pace to come back to you. And what we've got now is we have a completely different dynamic in the championship, don't we? Is McLaren now, it's not a case of, oh, well, it will be close up front. I think that kind of win, you've got to put them as clear favorites to win the race now. And all kinds of things start to happen at this point. Now, McLaren clearly have to start thinking about team orders. If it's Lando and drops behind Oscar in a race, you're like, well, we have to put him in front now. That's a difficult conversation McLaren are going to have with Piastri this week. You suddenly get lots more focus on Red Bull. Are they going to be able to improve the car, develop the car? Are they going to be able to kind of claw some of that deficit back? Which is not something I thought I'd be saying this year, and yet it's come about so quickly. So yeah, it's a huge statement. And while the championship, I don't want to get too carried away because it is such a big gap, and really McLaren have no margin for error there. Do they? One retirement, from a race, if Max can even score 10 points in that environment, in that situation, it would look pretty hard to come back from. But we've seen things like this happen in Formula One before. So yeah, really, really, really great for the championship. And if Lando can win again this weekend, regardless of where Max is, we then go to two places where Red Bull, I think, are going to, they're going to struggle. Maybe not Baku. They've been all right in Baku over the years, but definitely Singapore. We saw how bad they were there. So you get into a position where if Lando can win all of those races and Max, even if he's second, but if he's third or if he's fourth, he's fifth, you're taking big chunks of points out of there suddenly. So yeah, the whole championship just feels very different.
Yeah, I think also if you look at the weekends of the two teams, it shows you why we're in this position that we are and why McLaren have this big advantage at the moment. McLaren came there, bolted on an upgrade, not as big as the kind of now famous Miami one that really unlocked the performance, but not insignificant either. Went on the car despite the mixed conditions throughout practice with rain, wind, really remarkably high gusts of wind throughout those sessions. Very hard to get a proper reading of the car. Lando was at one with it, in qualifying over 3 tenths faster, which is a big margin for anyone to have over Max Verstappen at any Grand Prix. And then at Red Bull, it was the opposite. They decided that they would roll back some of the updates, the floor essentially roll back to a much earlier specification on Max Verstappen's car, something that he felt comfortable with, but still never managed to refine in those messy practice sessions with red flags and wind and rain. Never managed to refine a good balance in the car either, which was essentially why he felt that he could not compete with Lando Norris on the Sunday. Meanwhile, Checo Perez continued with the latest upgrade. Red Bull reckon that was potentially worth a couple of tenths or so, having looked at the initial data. But now what they're going to do is try and understand the best bits of both and how, with this development direction that they've had from the start of the year. Remember, they started the year so dominant. How it's possible that McLaren, with some very focused but very successful upgrades, have been able to overhaul them while they've still kind of are scrapping around and trying to find answers. And you're right. I'd say these next all three races are very, very important. Monza, it's a new track surface, very smooth track surface. That is good news for Red Bull. but the curbs still have to be ridden on in those slow chicanes.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
that was, if we go back to even last year, Ferrari, especially over one lap, kind of came out of nowhere a little bit to challenge Red Bull. Couldn't do it over a race distance, but still, when you consider how much it's changed, and also I'd say how easy that McLaren is to get in the right setup window compared to the Red Bull. The Red Bull just seems very snappy. A lot of the issues we've seen Mercedes complain about, the Ferrari drivers complain about in recent years, but McLaren just seem to be able to get it nailed down. So yeah, Monza will be important. As you say, Baku street circuit, bumpy. We know that that's been an issue for Red Bull this year, especially now that everybody else is right on their tail. Of course, that wasn't the case when we were in Baku in 2023. And then Singapore was the one track they didn't win at in 2023. Yeah. So all of these things coming together, if McLaren are able to just, and Lando especially, just to have that consistency throughout, then they can really take some points out of Red Bull over the next 3 races. And then I think we can start to look at it and think, well, maybe. But of course, Lando has Max Verstappen as his rival, and Max is a driver who is incredibly consistent. So yeah, an interesting one. More generally, taking into account, especially the development of those 2 cars and what's been going on behind the scenes at those 2 teams, do you think now, Nate, that McLaren is the team with the brightest future in Formula One?
I do actually. I mean, you could say Ferrari have Lewis joining. Mercedes are backing Antonelli, and they'll have Russell. But yeah, everything we've seen at McLaren, let's say for 4 or 5 years now, you have to give Zak Brown huge credit for what he's built. There's been a lot of false starts there where he's kind of rebuilt the technical department again and again. He did, there was about 2 or 3 go rounds of that. And he finally, the best thing I think that's ever happened to McLaren was Andreas Seidel getting poached by the Audi Sauber project, wasn't it? Because that allowed him to bring in Stella as team boss. And he's been phenomenal what he's done there. And I remember speaking to Zak Brown at the end of 22, and he said, we can challenge Red Bull for a championship in 2025. And I have to say, even then, it was like, well, that's a tall order, given where Red Bull was then, and given where McLaren was then. It was really difficult. And our belief, and it has been kind of shaken a lot this year, but it was that, the problem with F1, we kept saying, was that, well, these advantages keep it's very difficult to break them. They can be locked in for a long, long time. And that was true for years. I think we're seeing a lot of different things happening, aren't we? We're seeing, the teams are understanding and being restricted in a good way by the cost cap a lot differently. We've got teams that have different, different bits of time in the wind tunnel, based on that sliding scale of development. So I think a lot of little things are coming together. But if you look at where McLaren's at right now and the way they've been able to develop this car, and I think the smartest thing they did with the Miami upgrade, to your point about how easy that is to get into the window, was they had a car that had some very, very clear strengths last year, and they sacrificed some of those to make it a very, very all-round car. And we're seeing that, the benefits of that now. They understood their car very well. You take all those things I've mentioned, and then you put Lando Norris in that car. You put Oscar Piastri in the car. You put the fact you've got these 2 young, hungry drivers that, I think we're actually, with Lando, we know what we've got with Lando, but he just seems to, I think each win, we saw it with Max as well, and you see it with drivers. Every time they win, it's a bit more confidence. It's a bit more certainty in their talent. It's a bit more authority as well behind the scenes to kind of throw their weight around. Because one thing I do think is interesting with McLaren, and it does make me a bit wary, and I'd love to know what you think about this as well, is that there still seems to be a very strange dynamic when they're talking to their drivers from the pit wall. There's still an air of uncertainty. There's still an air of indecisiveness. At the beginning of that race, Lando dropped behind, and Will Joseph was, and we, obviously we heard how those 2 interacted throughout that whole debacle in Hungary. And he was saying, who do you think's our fight's here with? And Lando's like, well, it's Max, isn't it? And then, but even then it was very British. He was like, well, but our fight's with whoever you think it's with. And maybe they're doing that to throw Red Bull off. I don't know. But that's the one thing at the moment that it's a very small part, and it doesn't affect my answer to your question. But yeah, the longer term for McLaren looks great, especially if they finish this year as the strongest car, then we go into next season and it's not, oh, who's going to beat Max? It's, well, who's going to beat McLaren? Regardless of whether they actually win the championship on points this year, I think they will win the constructors the way things are going. But whether or not Lando wins the drivers' championship, they could go into next season with the strongest car. And that is, we haven't been able to say that about any of Red Bull's rivals since 2022. So really bright for them. And yeah, I mean, it is remarkable how it's turned around. And I think, the I know Netflix always follows these teams around, but hopefully they've been, following that McLaren team very, very closely all season, because it's just the scale of that change has just been remarkable. So yeah, it's an incredible story. And I know some of the comms team, I was talking to one of them today, and they're not doing another race now until Mexico. And I was like, oh, you're going to be missing all the good bits. And they were like, yeah, I know, it's not worked out great. So they know now as well. That's what's really nice, knowing a team and knowing that, McLaren has been through some really difficult times. You suddenly see the people that work there, and there's a spring in their step, and there's, the shoulders are back, they're confident. And you look at Red Bull, and they're starting to get squeamish. They're starting to think, well, look, we're not, that kind of attitude you get when you win, it very, very quickly can fall apart. So yeah, I think that there's a lot going on. But McLaren certainly right now, I mean, if you were to predict who your 2025 champion is, I think the bravest call would be saying someone that isn't Lando Norris, because right now it seems like he's going into 25 is gonna be the guy to beat. Now maybe obviously things can change around, but we're obviously looking ahead. So yeah, great times for McLaren at the moment, and full credit to everyone who's involved there, because probably one of the biggest turnarounds I can remember in Formula One for a long time.
Yeah, I think you're right to pick up on that theme that has maybe existed since the Miami victory. And Miami victory kind of came as a result of that upgrade, but also a little bit out of the blue for everyone. And it seemed, in some ways opportunistic, because Lando benefited from the safety car, but there was also an underlying pace there that got them across the line. And then there was quite a few opportunities between there and the next one in Hungary, which I wonder whether McLaren will look back at the end of the year and wonder what might have been in a few of those. I'm thinking Canada, that pit stop call. Okay, even if Lando had kept the lead when the rain came there, or sorry, when it went to slicks, would he have kept it right to the end? Maybe not, but they certainly could have put themselves in a better position for that one. Spain, again, that was on Lando. It was the start again. This other theme that's running through, and then in Silverstone, the timing of the pit stops as well really let them down. And you do wonder, it's going to come down to some marginal points, I think, potentially at the end of this year, especially if McLaren can springboard off this victory. And if that happens, I do wonder whether they're going to look back and see it as a missed opportunity. Because as right as you are to say that they are a team on the up, F1 teaches you anything, it's that while you've got a car that's capable of winning, you've got to absolutely make the most of it, because we do have long periods of dominance from time to time, but it's amazing how quickly it can be snatched away. Mercedes will tell you that from 2021 to 2022, ahead of the car launches, or even at the car launches in 22, I think everyone was said, well, of course, Mercedes can't be,
Yeah,
back midfield.
It'll be them and then everyone else nearby. Yeah, it was that
exactly. Yeah, and yet these things change, and of course there's that regulation change in 26 as well that McLaren have to keep an eye on. So yeah, that will be fascinating as to whether this one ends up as a building year, to which leads to perhaps championship success in 25, or whether it ultimately gets viewed as a missed opportunity as we get a few years down the line.
And I think one thing that is really going to be telling now, and we talk about experience a lot, don't we, in sports generally, but one thing that's going to be a key differentiator between these two is the experience. Red Bull have been in championship fights. Obviously, McLaren, with Mercedes in 21. They then won two quite comfortably in 22 and 23. That can go one of both ways. Maybe we're looking at a team that's just been allowed to get a bit complacent. They won last year's championship so simply in terms of the points. Or it's a team that is like, no, actually, no, we're good enough for this challenge. We can eke out this championship now. We can get there. So I think that's going to be a dynamic to keep an eye on. Just to your point, though, because I was looking back through results earlier today, and you're absolutely right that winning when you've got the best car is big. And I think you're right. McLaren have left so many points on the table, and Hungary, especially, they were 7 points that they physically took away from Lando themselves. I mean, there were mistakes here and there, but that was physically 7 points where they said, and I know, they weren't thinking about the championship.
You could argue Lando lost that at the start. Again, it was
true
at the start that created that situation.
No, yeah, that's very true. But I mean, in terms of when the race played out the way it did, and Lando suddenly got back ahead, Jean Todt and the Ross Brawn Ferrari team would have said, no, you're staying there. You know what I mean? And I think that that's not McLaren's fault. They're not in that place because they're still kind of adjusting to this new mindset of being champions or championship contenders. So, but that's more what I mean, that they've got to get their head around the big time feel of it now. But just a quick one on Red Bull and what I was saying about winning when you're ahead. It's also worth noting that Red Bull may well look back at the Australian Grand Prix this year and wonder if that's the moment where things got away from Max Verstappen. Because remember, those first 5 races, Red Bull were in a different planet to everyone else. The one race they didn't win was Australia, which is when Max had that brake fire. Ferrari did look a lot quicker at that race. But if I'm not mistaken, that ended Ferrari 1-2 with Lando third and Max not finishing. So that's what 15 points that Lando gained on Max there. If Max had won that and Lando was fourth, he's got even more points to play with right now. So you're right. There's both teams have left points kind of in the uncollected column. And it was interesting, wasn't it? Christian Horner said on Sunday, we're very lucky McLaren had that slow start to the year, which he's absolutely correct. They are lucky to have had that. But I can't help but think that Australia, if we get into the penultimate round and it is close, you go back to Australia, you can go through all the things. You'd be able to point to a bunch of races as you have and say McLaren dropped all these points here. You could also say, man, when Red Bull's car was completely untouchable, a pretty rare reliability issue, one that we don't see all that often, completely robbed them of winning the race. So yeah, there have been missed opportunities. And this is why the dynamic of 21 was great, because you could see all year it was margins and they were both edging like towards the final goal together. This one is so different, isn't it? Because you've got one guy far out ahead. It's like he's almost won the marathon, and then he's got splin shins at the splin. I can never say that, shin splints at the end, or he sprained his ankle or something in the final mile. Meanwhile, the guy who's a mile behind him has suddenly worked out, hey, all the training I've done has made me fitter for this part of the marathon I've ever been. And it's like, well, who's going to get there first? Is it the guy that's not quite running as well as he was earlier, or the guy that's sprinting home, all this gas in the tank, but might not have enough, in there to do it? So very, very different championship to what we're used to. And yeah, I think either team that doesn't win the Drivers' Championship will have something to look back on later in the year and be like, that was the moment, or those were the moments that cost us it. Because right now that is how it feels. I think it could go, maybe not to the wire, but it could go close. A few weeks ago that didn't seem possible.
I also want to talk about Jack Doohan, named Alpine's driver of 2025. He'll join Pierre Gasly at that team, replacing Esteban Ocon, of course, we know is on his way to Haas. It's an interesting situation now because we've got a few rookies coming on the grid, not least Colapinto this weekend, but of course not expecting him to be there in 2025. But we've got Ollie Behrman, who will be at Haas as well, Doohan, and we're pretty certain Antonelli in the Mercedes. So what do you think are the realistic expectations for each of those drivers, Nate, coming in with a rookie season? Because there's always potential hurdles to try and clear, ones that you're going to trip up over as well. Mistakes that are often made, especially again in this cost cap era. The cost of an accident is so great. So yeah, what are the targets of rookies coming in next year, do you think?
Well, it's very a lot of it's based on where you're going, isn't it? I think Behrman, Doohan, I think they're in a much better spot than Antonelli. Antonelli's in a car that we've seen win a lot of races. 3 races this year, some championships. So I think he's the one who's kind of under the microscope. Doohan is, I think, under pressure for a different reason. He very much feels like, I mentioned Oscar Piastri and Alpine not signing him. I think Alpine have gone in the Doohan direction for that exact reason. They put him and Mick Schumacher against each other in a test. By all accounts, Doohan really wiped the floor with Schumacher in that test. It was very, very, clear that one of those drivers did better than the other one. And so, yeah, he's kind of coming in, and now he's kind of the face of Alpine now. And that story of them letting Piastri go, it hurt a lot of people. It cost some people their jobs at Alpine, ultimately. So there's some internal pressure there, but I do actually think though that every single rookie will place themselves under the same pressure, themselves as Antonelli does, Behrman does, etc. But I think the perceptions outside next year, Antonelli's the guy that everyone's looking at is this guy the next Lewis Hamilton? Is he the next Max Verstappen? And those other two, you can kind of get away with having a few more mistakes, because you can say, well, that Alpine's, a dog to drive, or that Haas, we've seen it before. It's it's a very, very tricky car, etc. The Mercedes, especially if George Russell is outperforming him regularly in high scoring positions, ultimately those are the positions people look at, first of all. So I think they're all under pressure, but yeah, Antonelli coming in. But again, and this we have the benefit of talking to a lot of these guys, and I've seen Antonelli in press conferences. I cannot believe how calm and cool that kid is. I mean, we used to call Kimi Räikkönen the Iceman. I don't think Anthony doesn't quite have that Scandinavian laid back approach, but he is. It's unbelievable, isn't it? How unfazed these kids are. I mean, Behrman's the same. You talk to him now, and he talks about Formula One like he's going down the shops to get some milk. He's so routine to these guys that it's a real credit to how well they've been trained and how well these teams do prepare them for Formula One. So yeah, it's just freakish how good these guys are, and makes me wish I'd been go-karting when I was 6 years old instead of playing Crash Bandicoot and playing Crash Bandicoot badly, I should add. But yeah, it's so exciting to see those guys all coming in.
Yeah, we should say Antonelli is in the Mercedes in FP1 at Monza. Of course, that's his home race as well. He's just turned 18, had his 18th birthday. I saw on social media that he got kind of covered in cream and all sorts of disgusting stuff in on the paddock, whichever paddock he was in. I'm not sure which one it was. So yeah, he will turn up, and we'll get our first sight of him on track alongside all the other F1 drivers. Of course, he's been doing a bit of testing in the 2022 car, and also I think 21 car he had to go in when he first started out testing with Mercedes earlier this year. But yeah, it's been accelerated through very quickly, and of course we're expecting him at Mercedes next year. Yeah, while you're on the subject of Crash Bandicoot and gaming, I think we should talk about a pretty cool feature you did with Max Verstappen in Zandvoort.
Yeah, I didn't actually plan that to be the segue, so nice job there on your part of noticing that.
I thought you dropped it there for me to take over.
No. I should have taken credit and said I'd done exactly that. No, you're right. It was a great start to the weekend. So we had Max Verstappen and Sergiño Dest, who plays for PSV, is Dutch born and raised, but actually plays for the US men's national team. So we might have listeners to this podcast who are familiar with Sergiño Dest. Used to play for Barcelona, now plays for PSV, which is Max Verstappen's favorite team. And we had the two of them sit down. Unfortunately, they both had to sit either side of me. They couldn't sit next to each other and just discuss gaming and sports and stuff. They had to do it via me. But what we did was we set them up on, and I kept stupidly calling it FIFA, which has now changed, hasn't it, to EAFC, right, which showed me to be a complete noob now, behind the times, basically. But I remember when it was called FIFA. We got them to play that together. We played Netherlands versus the US men's national team. Max Verstappen used to be about top 25 ranked in the world at FIFA. And then we got them playing the F1 game. We turned all of Max Verstappen's assists off, and we turned Sergiño Dest's on, and Max only beat him by a second. So they had great fun doing that. But what was great about it was we so often see these drivers in media mode, it's often defensive, especially in the case of Max. And I don't mean that as a knock to Max, but he's one of the guys that gets more questions week to week just because he is who he is. He's a world champion. And a lot of these drivers get a lot of questions very, very often. So they become defensive, they can become agitated. But Max Verstappen, away from all of that, when you get him talking about gaming, especially, and when you get him talking about stuff like that, he's just so chilled out, so calm. And it was really great to see. I think it's probably the most naturally Max Verstappen I've ever seen Max, up close and personal. I mean, when we started, he came in, the ESPN cameras that were there captured the two of them actually meeting for the first time, which was really cool. And they were chatting in Dutch. And then Max kind of glanced at me and it was like, we're doing this whole interview in Dutch, right? Knowing full well I'm English. And then, we joked later, like, oh, if you want to badmouth me later, just switch back to Dutch and stuff like that. So it was really great. And it's just one of those nice things that, we talk to these guys so often about racing and, mistakes they've made or wins they've had and stuff. But, they're human beings, and they often enjoy the same things that we all do. They just happen to be damn good at another thing that we all like as well. So yeah, it was really great. And I believe Sports Center have been kind of trickling that out over the past few weeks. So hopefully you'll be able to catch it if you're on top of ESPN's programming. But yeah, really cool thing to do. And not trying to convince people, because there's a lot of people that will be convinced against the idea that Max Verstappen is a nice guy. But my take on it is that when you get him in that environment, he is genuinely very, very nice. but I still wouldn't want to play him at any sport because you could see the competitiveness coming out even when they were on FIFA. There's that meme, isn't there, of people when you're 1-0 down on a game, you lean forward and the shoulders go
Yeah.
over. They both did that the moment the football game started. They were both there. Dest at one point told me, "You're distracting me," because I was asking him questions while he was playing. So, it's a sporting mindset. You can't get in these guys' ways when they're having any kind of competition. So I thought that was great.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point on Verstappen's character. I think he is misunderstood because a lot of
Yeah.
people relate with naturally what they see on track during that 1.5 hours. And he takes no prisoners on the racetrack. That is the way he operates. You look at Austria earlier this year. You look at the incidents with Lewis Hamilton in 2021. Everyone's got an opinion on whose, fault was, for which one. But he was very aggressive in the way he went about it. And then if you then hear an interview with him afterwards, of course he's going to be defensive. Of course he's going to hold his, his side of the argument in those. But you're right. I think Max is actually one of the most straightforward people to deal with that I've come across in Formula One, certainly among drivers. Because if you're in an interview situation with him or kind of any situation away from the racetrack, all he'll do is he'll tell it how it is. So if you ask him, some questions which are unanswerable, trying to get him to predict the future or stuff like that, he's going to give you a pretty short answer and you're not going to get much out of him. But if you can talk around wider, issues within motorsport, I think he's still very much laser focused on the things that are important to him. And that's motorsport. It's not like talking to Lewis where you sit down and you can talk about any number of issues around the world. But with Verstappen, yeah, I found him to be an incredibly nice, polite, and kind of interesting as well, and intelligent. I think that's something that really comes across when you're in those situations with him, is that he is immensely intelligent, and of course, all this time speaking in second languages and all the rest of it. He comes across really well. So yeah, just a little word on Max Verstappen, who I know we criticize often for the on track stuff. I think after Austria, we all had our opinions on that. But yeah, as a person away from it, he's a good guy. So quick look forward to Monza before we head to Monza itself. Very unusual circuit, low downforce setup, skinny rear wings are kind of the order of the day there. Who do you think it's going to suit?
Oh well, I mean the McLaren obviously is the obvious candidate there. In terms of, I mean, that McLaren just is good everywhere. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you look behind that, it's actually difficult to make out. I mean, did you see the thing on the podium when, sorry, not on the podium, in the cool down room when Charles Leclerc asked Max, how far ahead were you? And he said 22 seconds. And he had like a 1,000-yard stare into the distance of kind of like, I can't believe it. You would always hope that Ferrari can go well at Monza. I'm not sure. Everything we've seen from them this season, I think you're right. Like last year, they kind of, you said earlier, they kind of appeared from nowhere to kind of be a bit more competitive. Maybe that'll be the case this weekend. But I think the order we saw in Zandvoort, I could kind of see, I'd kind of back that being the same again. Ferrari kind of maybe on the fringes. Got to say, actually, because it's so rarely the other way around, and we're so quick to criticize Ferrari. So I know we're jumping back, but a flawless weekend from the strategy team for Ferrari and Zandvoort getting that podium, and then Charles Leclerc to back that up with that drive. So yeah, I think I would kind of pick. I know that's very much sitting on the fence, but I feel like I would pick a similar order, team to team at the front that we've seen. What do you think? I mean, am I missing anything obvious there with where these cars are?
No, I think you're right. Ferrari have an upgrade come in. Obviously, all the teams bring Monza specific bodywork and wings, especially to the Italian Grand Prix. But Ferrari do have the next of their upgrades. Now, their upgrades haven't actually been that successful in recent, go back last 10 races or so. They've struggled to keep up with McLaren. Of course, at the start of the year, they were Red Bull's closest rivals, and they haven't really made the progress that McLaren or Mercedes have made. So it'll be interesting to see whether they feel like they've unlocked something going into Monza, because I think Baku and Singapore are another two races where they'll expect to be fast. So these three races, I'd say, are crucial for Ferrari to just kind of get some results back on the board and give themselves a platform for 2025. But yeah, and I think, you know, Mercedes also going to be a contender, of course, in Canada, which is probably the closest race to Monza that we've had so far. Russell was very quick, took pole position, looked good in the race. So with all that said, I think we should move on to our podium predictions. Nate, congratulations from Zandvoort. You got 2 points with Lando Norris in first and Max Verstappen in second. How do you feel about that?
I felt very smug about it. I mean, I think within about 3 seconds, I'd sent you guys the picks, hadn't I, from last week? So yeah, I felt good, and it was so often the case, wasn't it, that picking Max was the easy way to get a couple points. It's not easy now to do that. So I'm glad I went against the norm.
Yeah, you've managed to close in on Katie, who is still, of course, leading our standings. She's on 16 points. You're on 14 points. I'm trailing behind on 11 points.
Yeah, she's putting us both to shame.
Yeah, she really is. I mean, she hasn't even turned up to the last 2 podcasts yet. She's still comfortably in the lead of our podium predictions. We don't actually have hers through yet, but we promise we will get them before the action starts in Monza, so it's nice and fair. So, Nate, I mean, because you won last week, I think it's only fair you go first this week. Who have you got? Top 3.
Oh, so I'm struggling with this one because I do think now that has shifted to it's got to be Lando at the front. It just where that car is, where he's at. The fact that, let's face it, McLaren will be giving him the better strategy because that's what you do when you've got a driver in the driver championship hunt. And then beyond that, it's really difficult because you've got drivers that are in different form as well. I still, you alluded to it earlier. You've still got to back Max Verstappen. He's such a freak of nature, in terms of what he's able to do with bad cars. I'd still put him second. And you're going to think I've just been looking at the Zandvoort podium, but I'm going to put Charles there. Because I think that Ferrari, you know, they've got an upgrade. It's Monza as well, and you know they're fired up, etc. So I think a repeat of my, you know, it set me in good stead last week. I would go for the same 3. So Lando first, Max second, and Charles Leclerc third. And a quick shout out to Ferrari. I don't know if you've seen, but the all black suits they're wearing, clothes they're wearing this weekend look absolutely sensational. I don't think they're doing anything with the car, but they look great. So hopefully we get to see those on the podium.
It's those teasers, isn't it? It gets everyone excited about what they might do with the car because I think it was last year there was all that talk about the yellow Ferrari, and of course it had some yellow on it, but actually when you compare it to this year's car, it's kind of the same. And then Miami was the other one, wasn't it, with the very cool light blue team kit, but then the car itself just had blue, which I know that you were not a fan of.
If they did a black Ferrari, it would be like part of it would have like a black engine cover or something, and the rest would be, and it would just look like you've done 2 liveries badly here rather than committing to one. So from everything we know, they're not doing that. But yeah, you're right. It's it is great when teams do that. I wish they committed fully when they, or were able to commit fully to them when they do them.
Yeah, well, it's quite funny, isn't it? Because the whole theme of this black team kit is a tribute to carbon fiber, of course, the material that the cars are made out of. So, I mean, if they did just go for a stripped carbon fiber car, it would probably look an awful lot like the Haas. And I'd imagine they'd probably get quite a lot of stick from people because people don't seem to like bare carbon fiber cars. I actually do. I spent a lot of time in the Haas garage over the weekend. I did a cool photo feature with them.
Yeah.
And up close, and you see the weave. I mean, it doesn't translate on TV, so it's, you know, I can understand why people don't like it. When you see up close, like the intricacies of the weave of the carbon fiber and how it all comes together, it is wonderful. Anyway, we're blabbering on about carbon fiber when I should be giving my.
This is where Katie adds so much structure and discipline to us. We just go off on these tangents.
That's it. Yeah, and yeah, once you get me started on carbon fiber, I probably won't stop for about half an hour.
He's not lying either, guys. He does. It's this could be a 20-minute podcast about carbon fiber.
Yeah, we won't do that. We won't put our listeners through that. Instead, I'll give my top 3 predictions. Going from third place, I'm going to say Carlos Sainz. Overdue a bit of a result. I'm fully buying into Ferrari being competitive at Monza, also because I want to get some points back on you guys, and I don't think either of you are going to do this. Lando Norris in second place.
Oh, okay.
And then Charles Leclerc taking a Ferrari victory in first. Of course, he won in Monaco as last time Ferrari won a race. And I don't truly believe this myself, but I think it would be great for the championship as well because one, getting kind of some points back and wins back for Ferrari, but also if Lando's a few places ahead of Max, it kind of takes some points out of him.
100%. And also,
wishful thinking.
Massive. Well, especially if he's not on the podium, because I think if you're not winning but you're finishing second, you can at least say, well, we didn't do too bad, we did the podium. But you suddenly have races where Max is finishing 5th and 6th, and those can really hurt teams in a way that finishing second doesn't do. So yeah, I like that one. I mean, that definitely is the people's podium right there. That's the one everyone wants to see.
Well, I'm expecting to turn up to Monza, and people having listened to the Unlapped podcast will be
there'll be signs saying we believe in carbon fiber, man. And I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, it should be said, Monza, there's always a terrific atmosphere, so definitely one to look forward to, and we will be back to report on everything that we saw, heard, and thought about over the Monza weekend next week. See you then.